At my son's wedding, in a crystal hall filled with light, my wife was introduced as a helper. It was not a slip of the tongue. It was not a joke. My son was standing right there. He said nothing. I held my wife's hand. I felt the familiar slight tremble. She smiled, as if she were used to being made smaller. I thought I was prepared for distance, for change, for growing apart, but I was not prepared for that moment of clarity. Sometimes what hurts most is not becoming poorer. It is being erased from your own family. If you have ever seen or lived through the feeling of being overlooked inside your own family, please subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment. Tell me where you are listening to this story from. As for me, I will tell you how it all began. From the moment I realized my wife and I had been placed in seats no one wanted to see. After that moment, I said nothing more. I learned long ago that in luxurious rooms, silence often speaks louder than protest. The glass ceremony hall reflected warm, golden light. Rows of white flowers stood in perfect lines, like a statement of flawlessness, where parents were meant to sit closest. My wife and I were guided to the back row. Near a side exit, the coordinator bowed politely, spoke softly. "This arrangement is more convenient." I understood what that really meant. Still, I nodded. Olivia sat beside me. She placed her handmade cloth bag at her feet. The dress she wore had no label. The stitching at her left cuff was slightly uneven. I was used to that. She never wanted to stand out. For Olivia, enough was a choice, not a lack. I looked around, shimmering gowns, tailored suits, laughter calibrated just loud enough to be noticed. We felt like two misplaced pieces in this picture. I thought about what Christopher had said on the phone weeks earlier. His voice was careful. Every word weighed. He told me I did not need to give a speech, did not need to stand up and congratulate anyone. "It keeps things cleaner," he said. I did not ask more. Sometimes a father chooses not to ask, to avoid hearing the answer he already knows. Olivia was the same. She only reminded me to bring a jacket. "The hall will probably be cold," she said. The music swelled. The bride and groom walked in to long applause. Jessica looked radiant, exactly the image she had always chased. Every step she took was calculated to draw attention. Christopher walked beside her. The familiar smile was there, but something about it felt stiff. I told myself it was just the pressure of a big day. I had defended my son that way for many years. Then, everything slipped. Jessica led a group of friends toward our section. Their voices were bright. Their eyes moved quickly, like they were taking inventory. Olivia stood first, out of habit. She always stood when someone approached, as if it were an unwritten rule of her life. I stood too, not out of courtesy, but because I did not want her to stand alone. Jessica looked Olivia up and down. I had seen that look before, many times, but never in front of so many people. She turned to her friends, smiled lightly, and said the sentence that froze the air. No raised voice, no emphasis, just one neat line, enough to place my wife beneath everything around her. I waited. I waited for Christopher to speak. Just one correction, one small gesture. He was standing right there, close enough for me to hear his breathing. But he said nothing. He nodded, very slightly. That nod was not for us. It was for the world he was trying to hold on to. Olivia did not react the way I expected. She smiled, lowered her head gently, the way she does when accepting a request in our small backyard. I felt her hand tighten in mine, then loosen. That was how she held herself together. I knew that sign. 30 years of marriage taught me when she was enduring something. I wanted to say so many things. But I also knew that at that moment, anything I said would be seen as out of place. More than that, I did not want to turn Olivia into the center of an argument she never wanted. I chose silence, not out of weakness, but because I was trying to preserve one last piece of peace for her that evening. The people around us quickly shifted topics. Attention drifted away, as if what had just happened were a detail not worth remembering. The music returned. Glasses clinked. I sat down, pulled the chair out for Olivia. She whispered that she was fine. I nodded, but inside me a door had just closed. No noise, no warning, just a quiet decision. I looked around the hall once more. The glass walls reflected us in the last row, small but unmistakably present. And I understood then. We were not seated by mistake. We were placed exactly where our son believed we belonged. From that moment on, I knew this evening would not end the way they had planned, not because I wanted to disrupt anything, but because the truth has a way of finding its path, even in rooms built to hide it. I kept my eyes on the ceremony hall, but my mind had left Palm Beach long before I realized it. There are moments when the present becomes too small to hold what is rising inside, and memory quietly finds its own way out. I looked at Olivia's hand resting on her lap. Thin fingers, a faint callus on her thumb. That mark did not come from diamond rings or crystal glasses. It came from earlier years, when we learned how to sacrifice without ever naming it. 30 years ago in Chicago, our apartment was on the 3rd floor. The wooden stairs creaked with every step. I worked during the day. At night, I took extra drafting jobs for a small shop. Olivia taught at the university. When night came, she graded papers and took on translation work. We did not talk much about being tired. We talked about Christopher, about his future, about the doors we believed education would open for him. The decision to send Christopher to boarding school did not come easily. The tuition was so high that we sold Olivia's book collection from her student days. I still remember that afternoon. Loading boxes of books into the car, Olivia stood quietly, her hand brushing the spine of the last book. She did not cry. She only said, "If these pages help him go farther, then we lose nothing." Then there was the house, the small home where Christopher took his first steps, where he drew his first crooked lines on the wall. We sold it to pay for the years that followed. Neither of us called it a loss. We called it an investment. Christopher was obedient then, bright. The letters from school were full of excitement at first. Then they grew shorter. His voice on the phone changed too. He shared less, asked less. I told myself it was a sign of growing up, that he was learning to stand on his own. I did not notice when the line between independence and distance was crossed. When Christopher graduated and entered the world of finance, that distance became clearer. He began to adjust how we appeared. The suggestions sounded reasonable. Dress more neatly. Avoid old stories. Do not talk about life in the countryside. I understood the pressure he faced in his new environment. I chose to go along. Olivia did too. She always believed that well-timed silence could protect the people you love, the small wooden house we moved into after retirement. Christopher never mentioned it in front of his friends. His visits were brief. He said the drive was long. Work was busy. I did not blame him. I believed everyone had their own rhythm. Still, each time he left, Olivia cleaned the living room more carefully than usual, as if afraid of leaving behind traces of herself. The call before the wedding was the first time Christopher said out loud what I had sensed for a long time. He told us to come, but there was no need to speak, no need to stand when introduced, and if anyone asked questions, he would answer. "The bride's family cares a lot about appearances," he said. "I just want everything to go smoothly." I heard Olivia's soft sigh on the other end of the line. She did not object. She only asked if Palm Beach would be cold. Now sitting in the back row, I understood what smoothly meant to my son. It meant we were present, but far enough not to disturb anything, visible enough to exist, yet faint enough not to be named. A slow bitterness spread inside me, not sharp, not explosive, deep, the bitterness of realizing that what you give in silence can also be denied in silence. Olivia leaned toward me, whispered that she was fine. I nodded, but inside me a question began to take shape, persistent, hard to dismiss. We did everything right so our son could hold his head high. So why, when he finally does, do we have to bow ours? The music shifted to something softer. A server passed by, placed a glass of water in front of us. I noticed a few guests glance over, curious, then move on. Maybe they heard that introduction. Maybe they believed it. Sometimes the truth does not need proof. It only needs to be accepted by the crowd. I held Olivia's hand tighter, not to comfort her, but to steady myself. I once believed time would wear away all differences, that given enough years, what is real would reveal itself. But that night I understood. Time can also cover things up, if people are determined to build layers thick enough. Christopher passed by our seats. His eyes avoided mine for a brief second. I did not call him back. I did not want to force him to choose. Not yet. But inside me a decision was slowly becoming clear. Not a decision to confront, but a decision to stop making ourselves smaller. Because if we continued to stay silent, that story about the helper would become the only truth told in this room. And I knew then it was time for memory, sacrifice, and everything we had hidden behind a simple life. To have a chance to speak, not in anger, but in truth, at the right moment. I do not know the exact moment when the air in the hall began to change. Maybe it was when the quiet murmurs faded, or when a few people straightened their backs, as if an invisible presence had entered the room. I only noticed when eyes stopped passing over us and began turning toward the main entrance. An older man walked in. His pace was slow but steady. He did not need an introduction. He did not need to raise his voice. His presence alone was enough to close conversations. I had seen him before, in newspapers. In financial reports, Christopher used to send me with excitement in his voice. Arthur Sterling, a name my son once spoke of as a great door, an opportunity that rarely comes twice. Jessica reacted first. She adjusted her hair, pulled Christopher closer. Her smile appeared quickly. Precisely. I watched them move toward Arthur with the confidence of people who believe they belong in that world. I did not pay much attention. That world was not mine. I turned to Olivia, asked softly if she wanted to step outside for some air. She shook her head, said she was fine, said she wanted to sit a little longer. Arthur did not linger with Jessica's group. He shook hands politely, exchanged a few formal words, then moved on. I saw Jessica's expression dip for a brief second, just enough to reveal confusion. Arthur passed a few more tables, then stopped in front of us. I thought he was looking for a seat, or someone behind us. I began to shift my chair to make room, but he stopped completely. He looked at Olivia, not the quick glance people give at parties. He looked closely, like someone searching through an old memory. Then his expression changed, not loud surprise, but slow, certain recognition. He bent slightly forward, just enough for me to feel the respect in the gesture. "Professor Olivia," he said. His voice was calm, but clear. "I did not expect to see you here." Both Olivia and I froze for a breath. Olivia blinked, as if making sure she had heard correctly. "You are Arthur?" she asked, just as calmly. He smiled. A smile not meant for the room. 20 years ago, you gave me an opportunity I did not know I needed that much," he said. "That scholarship did not just let me continue studying. It kept me from giving up." The sounds around us seemed to drain away. I heard chairs shift. Whispers held back. I saw Jessica standing not far away. The smile on her face stiffened. Christopher turned around. His eyes widened, as if he had just seen something not included in any of his plans. Olivia looked slightly uneasy. She always does when people mention things she considers ordinary. "I only did what I thought was right," she said. "You worked very hard back then." Arthur shook his head. "Not just that," he said. "Your foundation funded my entire research group. Without that trust, I would not be standing here today." I felt Olivia's hand tremble slightly, not from fear, but from being unaccustomed to her quiet work being named in public. I placed my hand on her shoulder. Arthur turned to me. His eyes studied my face, then suddenly lit up. "And you," he said, his voice slowing. "If I am not mistaken, you are Noah." I nodded. "The one who helped redesign the entire system for that pilot project," Arthur continued. "Your drawings saved us from a major failure." I did not deny it. I did not explain. Those things belonged to a distant time, a chapter I never thought needed repeating. But I felt the shift in the room. Eyes that had once been indifferent turned curious, then cautious. Arthur straightened, looked around the hall. "I am very surprised," he said, not addressing anyone in particular, "to see the two of you seated here." No one replied. The silence stretched long enough for everyone to fill it with their own thoughts. I saw Christopher step forward. His voice came out a bit rushed. "Arthur, let me introduce." Arthur raised his hand. Not high, but firm. "No need," he said. "I know who they are." Jessica stood beside Christopher. The confidence had left her face. She looked at Olivia, then at me, as if truly seeing us for the first time. I did not see regret in her eyes, only calculation, looking for an exit. Arthur turned back to us, lowered his voice. "I do not know what the story is here," he said, "but if anyone ever thought the two of you were on the sidelines, That is a serious misunderstanding. Olivia gently shook her head, as if to end the conversation. We are here as parents, she said. That is enough. Arthur looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. He said nothing more, only greeted us once again before walking away. But everything that needed to be said had already been said, not through numbers, not through titles, but through the way people in the room began to look at us differently. I sat down. My heart beat slowly, heavily. I knew that from that moment on, every mask in this hall had begun to crack. Not because we tried to expose anything, but because the truth, when called by its proper name, does not need to raise its voice, to make itself impossible to ignore. After Arthur walked away, the room did not return to what it was. The music kept playing, but it sounded as if it had been turned down half a beat. Conversations resumed, yet they no longer flowed naturally. I could feel it clearly. The way people looked at us had changed. They were no longer glancing past. They were looking closer, longer, as if piecing together the fragments they had just received, wondering what they had missed. Christopher stood still in the aisle for a few seconds. Then he walked quickly toward us. Jessica followed. Her hand rested on her husband's arm, a familiar gesture like someone steadying herself when the ground suddenly tilts. I looked at my son. For the first time that evening, I saw real confusion on his face. Not worry about the wedding, but fear of losing what he had built with so much effort. "Dad, Mom," Christopher said. His voice was lower than usual. "What just happened?" I raised my hand. Not high, just enough to stop him, not because I wanted to interrupt, but because I knew, if I let him continue, the apologies would come too fast, too arranged. Olivia remained seated. Her hands rested neatly on her lap. She did not look at Jessica. She looked at Christopher. Her calm gaze hurt me more than any accusation ever could. Jessica bent slightly forward. Her voice softened. I didn't mean anything by it. It was just a small misunderstanding. She smiled. A smile trying to return to its familiar place. People are watching. Let's not make a big deal out of this. I heard that clearly. Don't make a big deal. In that moment, I understood something. To them, the truth was only an obstacle to be minimized, not something to be faced. I stood up. Not quickly, not slowly. I stood the way a man does after he has thought long enough. I don't think this was a misunderstanding, I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried far enough for nearby tables to hear. I think it was a choice. Christopher shook his head and stepped closer. Dad, I was trying to keep everything smooth. Smooth, for whom I asked. I did not wait for an answer. I turned to Olivia. Do you want to stand up? I asked. She rose slowly. She adjusted the hem of her dress. The familiar motion she makes when preparing to leave a place that no longer needs her presence. I reached into my inner jacket pocket, took out a thick, cream-colored envelope. No name on it. I had carried it all evening. Out of old habit. Part of me had hoped to give it quietly. This is our wedding gift, I said, holding it up. I planned to give it after the ceremony. Without anyone knowing, Christopher looked at the envelope. A familiar spark crossed his eyes. I knew he had guessed what it was. Jessica knew too. Her grip on his arm tightened. I thought, I continued, that as you build your life, a stable foundation would give you peace of mind. I paused, long enough for the room to settle. But then, I heard my wife introduced as someone there to provide support services. And I saw you remain silent. I opened the envelope. No one needed to see clearly. I knew what was inside. I folded the paper once, then again. The sound of paper was small, but in that silence, it was unmistakable. I tore it in half, then tore it again. The pieces fell into my hand. Light, meaningless. If keeping appearances requires making your mother smaller, I said, then this gift has no meaning. Jessica let out a very soft sound. Christopher stood frozen. I saw something collapse inside him, quietly, like a structure losing its support. I placed the torn pieces back into the envelope, folded it closed, like ending a chapter already read. Arthur had returned. He stood a few steps away. He did not intervene. He said only one sentence, enough that no one in the room could pretend not to hear. I need people who are not ashamed of where they come from, he said. That is the minimum condition for my trust. Christopher turned toward him. His mouth opened, then closed. Jessica lowered her head. Her eyes darted quickly, searching for an exit. I did not look at them again. I took Olivia's hand. Her hand was warm, steady, not trembling. We walked away. No one stopped us. The path from the back row to the main door had never felt so long, and never so clear. I heard whispers behind us, but they no longer reached me. I focused only on Olivia's steps beside mine. Outside, the old car was waiting. The driver opened the door, asked nothing. We sat down. The door closed. As the car began to move, I looked through the window one last time. The crystal hall was still glowing, but for me that light had closed, not out of anger, but because there are places where once the truth has spoken, there is nothing left to return for. The car rolled away from the mansion gates. The lights behind us grew smaller in the rearview mirror. I did not look back again. Palm Beach was unusually quiet that night, as if every sound had stayed behind, along with the crystal glasses and well-practiced congratulations. Olivia sat beside me, leaning back in her seat, hands folded neatly on her lap. She said nothing for a long while. Neither did I. Some stretches of road do not need words. The driver asked if we wanted to stop anywhere. I told him to drive straight to the beach, not to escape, but because I knew Olivia needed open space, wind, the smell of salt, room to breathe more deeply. The car stopped along a quiet stretch of road. Sand extended into the dark. Waves moved steadily, unhurried. We got out, walked slowly, shoes in our hands. The sand was cool under our feet, familiar, more real than any red carpet. Olivia spoke first. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I made you stand up like that." I stopped, looked at her. "No," I said. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up sooner." We sat on a wooden bench facing the dark water scattered with moonlight. I told her what I had been thinking the whole way there, that I once believed a parent's duty was to open the path and then step back. But stepping back does not mean allowing yourself to be erased. Olivia listened. She nodded, her eyes gentler. She did not blame Christopher. She did not excuse him either. She only said that everyone must learn their own lesson, in their own way. The days that followed passed quietly. We returned home. The garden was the same. Olivia trimmed the rose bushes. I fixed a loose section of the wooden fence. Life did not change direction suddenly. It simply returned to its usual rhythm, the rhythm we chose long ago. The phone rang a few times. I did not answer, not out of anger, but because I believe some things only become clear when a person is left alone with the space they created. News from Palm Beach reached us through acquaintances. The wedding continued, but no one spoke of it as a social triumph anymore. Christopher and Jessica faced unpaid bills and canceled appointments. I heard it, then let it go. I felt no satisfaction, no relief, only that these were natural consequences of choices made in public. One afternoon, Olivia handed me a letter. It was not long. Christopher wrote that he needed time. He did not apologize in the way I once expected, but he admitted he had been afraid. Afraid of losing his place, afraid of being judged, afraid of not resembling the people he was trying to blend in with. I folded the letter, placed it on the table. I told Olivia that when our son was ready to speak as a son, not as someone making a presentation, we would listen. The sun slowly set behind the trees. Olivia brewed tea, set 2 familiar cups on the table. I looked at her, the woman once misnamed in a room full of light, now sitting here calm and whole. And I understood something. We did not leave that wedding in defeat. We left with our dignity intact. That night, I wrote a few lines in an old notebook, not to record what was lost, but to remind myself of what was kept. I wrote that true wealth is not found in gifts given, but in the ability to withdraw them when they begin to harm what matters most. I wrote that when someone chooses a humble life, it is not because they have nothing to show, but because they know what does not need proving. Olivia turned off the light, wished me good night. Before closing my eyes, I thought of Christopher, not with anger, but with careful hope. Maybe one day he will understand this. Parents do not need to be lifted by titles. They only need not to be pushed down in exchange for someone else's approval. Outside, the waves kept moving. Steady, patient, I fell asleep with a simple thought, that we had done our part. The rest life would teach. And if there is one thing I am certain of, it is this. Dignity is not something that can be taken from you, unless you hand it over yourself. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, I hope you will support it with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it so honest family stories like this can continue to be told. The lesson I learned is simple. Parents may sacrifice everything for their children, but they should never trade their dignity for the price of acceptance. The most lasting wealth does not live in status or in the eyes of others. It lives in how we treat the people